Welcome everyone. I'm Charlotte Willis, Divisional Manager for Professional Services at the One Group. It's great to see you on our first webinar of 2022. This is in association with the team at Fertility Matters at Work, Becky and Claire, as you can see on here, ready to take it away shortly. So firstly, I'll just mention who the One Group are. I'm hosting here from our Peterborough offices in Lynchwood today. It's looking very rainy outside, so it's nice to be on an interesting webinar. So we specialise in recruitment across the Midlands, East Midlands and beyond. We have 7 specialist divisions, including office, HR, finance, marketing, sales and IT. I'm trying to get them all in, and technical as well. Mustn't miss them off. So following the session today, if there is any recruitment you'd like support on, then please get in touch via me. I'll add my email to the chat box. Okay, so feel free to use the chat box for any sort of chat within the discussion, and we'll do some Q&A about 40 minutes into the session. And I'll pose those questions to Becky and Claire and just monitor those. So back in December, we held a webinar called Becoming a Menopause Friendly Employer. This one on fertility really follows on from that. Becky attended the menopause one, and I called her afterwards and we got chatting about the pressures on those going through treatment whilst trying to work. This is rarely talked about. It affects so many people. Pretty much everyone has a friend or a colleague that they know is going through something similar like this as the years go on. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Becky and Claire to share their own journey with you and just go through the presentation and give you lots of information on why this is such an important issue. Thanks, Becky and Claire. I'll go on mute now and let you take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you to everyone who has taken the time out today to come and listen to this presentation. We're going to be talking about fertility matters at work and why. And the question of, well, why does fertility matter in the workplace often comes up, and people think, well, what's it got to do with work? It's such a personal issue. It's something that people should keep to themselves. It's very private. But what we have found, both personally and professionally, is that there are many, many people who are struggling with fertility whilst at work, and it is impacting them in the workplace. So as Charlotte mentioned, menopause has been a huge topic on the wellness agenda, and we feel that fertility is going to be the next one in that space. When we're thinking about women's health, when we're thinking about the gender pay gap and the challenges that are in the way for people who are having to go through this whilst maintaining their career at the same time. And we think about family-friendly employers. So many employers now are recognised as being family-friendly, yet many don't go beyond the point where you actually have that baby in your arms. And what we're hoping to do is to try and incorporate fertility friendly into the family-friendly definition. And that starts with preconception. And for many people, it's a long and difficult journey, which is why we've created Fertility Matters at Work. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about what infertility actually is and why do people need fertility treatment, how common it is, what it means for someone to have to go through this, the impact that it can have in the workplace and on the individual. We'll touch on fertility and employment law, and we'll also talk about what we offer and how we can support organisations in becoming fertility friendly. It's been, I think, 2 years now, Claire, isn't it, since we came together. There's 3 of us who have co-founded Fertility Matters at Work, so myself and Claire, who will introduce ourselves in a moment, and also our co-founder Natalie, who couldn't be here today. But if I start by introducing myself, so I'm Becky Kearns. I previously worked in HR, and I was diagnosed at the age of 27 with early menopause. So for me, I was suddenly told I was in a new role in HR, and had sights on moving through the ranks and was in the succession pipeline. And I was suddenly told that I may not be able to have children, and that if I wanted to have children, I would need to go through IVF straight away. And that was a huge turning point in my career and turning point in my life, really, where I had to really start thinking about what I wanted. And I had always wanted to be a mum. It's a dream that I'd held right from being a little girl. It's something I had assumed would happen when I wanted it to easily. And that wasn't the case. And that isn't the case for many out there. So I was then thrown into IVF. I went through 5 cycles of IVF in quite close succession. Also had a devastating miscarriage on our first round. And eventually over those cycles, and that was over a period of about 18 months, I had to make the decision to use an egg donor to conceive. And thankfully, my story has a happy ending. I now have 3 girls through egg donation. And since then, I have been really passionate about raising awareness and starting conversations about this topic, both in my own personal situation with donor conception, because I felt very lonely in that at the time, but also reflecting back on my time working in HR and in the workplace, where in my 12 years, I never once had anybody come to me to ask me what they were entitled to or to ask for support when they were going through fertility treatment. And I remember feeling like I was the only one going through this. And it's only since my journey that I've realized that this is really common. And quite often people don't talk about it for many different reasons, which we'll go on into later on. But then I joined up with Natalie, who is she's a podcast host. She hosts the Fertility podcast and is a broadcaster when she went through her own personal struggle with treatment. And then also Claire, who I'm going to hand you over to now just to introduce herself and why she's getting involved in this initiative.
Thanks, Becky. Good morning, everybody. So similarly to Becky, I work in HR. I still work in HR, and I was working in the NHS as a middle senior manager when I found out I needed to have IVF treatment to conceive. So we'd been trying to conceive for several years at this point. I was in my late 30s. And we were told that we would need assisted treatment to kind of conceive. And then we started trying via the NHS. I'm luckily in an area whereby my postcode allows 3 cycles of IVF treatment that is dictated to by clinical commissioning groups in your area. So you will find there's a great difference across the UK about who's allowed what. So we were allowed 3 cycles before my 40th birthday, but unfortunately I was sort of teetering on the edge of being 40. So we had 2 back-to-back cycles, both of which were unfortunately a fail. And this affected me massively in work. I did get to a point where I couldn't cope emotionally, and I took 6 weeks off with stress. That was purely down to the treatment and the fact that we'd had 2 fails, and I was looking at the fact that I would never become a mum, we would never have children, and it just impacted me on ways that I find still now really difficult to describe several years on. So we had a bit of a break, and then we had to pay for treatment for a 3rd and final cycle. I kind of described to people that cost us in the region of about £15,000, and this is an additional pressure which people don't consider. That was our money, that was our savings, and we used every single part of it to actually conceive and go on. I don't know if my screen's gone. Becky, can you still see me?
Yes, can still see you. Yeah.
All right, sorry, my screen's just suddenly gone blank. I'm really sorry, everybody. As long as you can still see me, that's absolutely fine. So we paid around £15,000 to have the treatment, and we were successful on that 3rd attempt. But the impact that had on work, and I look back now, I since coming back off maternity leave in 2019, I've been promoted. This is my 3rd promotion now, and I think what I did is I just left work in the background, and I didn't really put any effort into it or try, even though that I knew in my heart that I was good at what I did and I could do it and I could climb the career ladder, so to speak. So it was really, it's actually a bit of an eye opener, and even going through that journey, you still look at it and reflect back and think, flipping heck, that's the impact it had in work. I mean, there are so many complexities with it. We were talking just before, and Becky's alluded to the fact already that actually when you start having this conversation with people, more and more people put their hands up and say, that's happened to me, or I've experienced a miscarriage and I'm struggling to conceive, or I need treatment, etc., etc. So, you know, this is a conversation we do need to normalize, hence why I joined forces with Becky and Natalie. And like Becky, in my 20 odd years of working in HR, I think recently in the last 2 years, I've had someone come forward and say they're going through IVF treatment. But prior to that was nobody. And I worked for Tesco for 15 years, and they employ in the region of 250,000, 300,000 people in the UK. I didn't work with all those people, but I worked in large stores that had 800 staff, 900 staff. So for nobody to come forward and actually say, I'm going through this is just a bit of a mystery. And it just shows how much we need this conversation to be started today. So that's my story.
Thank you, Claire. I'm going to move on to the first slide. I'm assuming you can't see it, Claire, or can you?
No, I'm back now, Becky. I don't know what happened. Sorry, I just had a bit of a wobbly moment when my screen went black. So, infertility. So what is infertility? So it's defined by the World Health Organization as a disease of the male or female reproductive system defined by the failure to achieve a pregnancy after 12 months or more of regular unprotected sexual intercourse. This applies to the first one on here, so that's primary infertility. So this is if somebody can't conceive at all or never achieve a live birth. The secondary infertility is around people who do already have a child but are struggling to conceive their second or third or fourth or subsequent baby. A lot of people do actually, the amount of people that get affected by primary and secondary infertility is the same stat, so it's around 1 in 6 or 7 people, and that's a statistic that the NHS put on their website, and the Fertility Network also say it affects this amount of people. This does vary across the world, so this is primarily in the UK. We also look at social infertility. So social infertility can be for various amount of reasons. You could be single and not in a relationship, so therefore you don't have a partner to conceive or to help you conceive, or you could be in a same-sex relationship, so LGBTQ plus community, people who will need assisted reproductive treatment to be able to conceive. Sorry, Becky, next slide.
Thank you. So thinking about this patient journey, and I think it's really important to just point out what infertility is, because it quite often can be seen as a lifestyle choice, or someone's choosing to have IVF. There's so many misconceptions out there. So we just wanted to talk about some of these so that people can realise actually, for many people, it is the only way they can build their family. And quite often, many of us wouldn't choose to go through IVF, but it's something that we're forced to do in order to achieve our dream. And just to talk through some of these misconceptions, I think quite often IVF is seen as the solution to all fertility problems, when actually IVF doesn't work every time, and the success rates are relatively low. Claire, just correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's around 23%, isn't it, of cycles resulting in a live birth. Treatment is often seen as just a few injections and scans, and actually it's much more intense emotionally as well as physically as well. I think if we talk about a typical IVF cycle in terms of timing, so if you think about in the workplace, I've often heard people say, oh, I've been asked to, teachers for example, I've been asked to have my treatment during the school holidays, so there's no impact to work. And you actually have very little say over when you can have your cycle. It's timed at the start of your period, depends when your period arrives. You then have to have regular scans, and these can be every other day, blood tests. And quite often, I mean, I remember going, leaving the house at 6:30 in the morning to get to the clinic for the first appointment at 7:30, an hour journey there, then have my appointment and then rush back into work to try and get in for 9, 9:15, and feel guilty that I was late, but all the while trying not for it to impact work. And quite often it's just really difficult for people to take those appointments outside of the working day. And then at the point where you're called in for egg collection, that's very much dependent on how your body reacts to the treatment. And it's how long is a piece of string. Nobody can say at the beginning of their cycle, I'm going to need time off to recover from a procedure that requires sedation, and quite often there can be side effects afterwards. It is really difficult for these people to have these conversations when actually they don't know what they're asking for in terms of the exact dates and times they need off. But what we talk about is flexibility as being really key for this. And then there's the embryo transfer, which again depends on how the embryo develops, and can be at very different times for people. There's quite often people feeling that the issue is always with the woman as well, when in fact actually 50-50, there's a 50-50 split between male infertility and female infertility. Now it does impact the woman more because it is the woman that has to go through the more invasive part of treatment. But there will be men as well within your organisation who are supporting their partner, who are dealing with infertility themselves as well. As Claire alluded to, the NHS, so there's a misconception that the NHS will just pay for treatment, very much dependent on where you are. It depends on a number of different parameters. I wasn't eligible due to my hormone levels. And so for many people, it's not just an emotional struggle, a physical struggle, but it's also a financial struggle as well. And then when you think about in the workplace and needing to take time off and thinking about paying for treatment, that's another big decision that people need to make and often try to power through so that it doesn't impact them so much at work. Also, we know that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss and miscarriage, which is a huge number. And we often hear from people as well who are going through miscarriages in the workplace and are just powering through because they don't want to say anything. I myself, when I went through my miscarriage, I felt very pressured into coming back to work because I'd already taken time off for the IVF cycle. And so there's lots to think about. And actually the final one, the IVF works first time and guarantees a baby. There is no guarantee at the end of this. It may be that people need to take an alternative path to parenthood, like myself, through donor conception. It may be that they choose to go down the adoption or the surrogacy route, which again has its own complexities. Or it may be that they head towards being child-free, but not by choice, which again has its own grief cycle. And speaking of grief, I wanted to share this. It's a really powerful quote that we felt really describes and brings to life what it can feel like to go through this. Often it's a very invisible loss that people are going through. It's the loss of a hoped for child or the family that someone has always dreamed of. And if you think about a bereavement of a loved one, there will always be memories, photographs, shared experiences. But for this, there is often nothing. And it can be very hard to describe to people that you're facing the prospect of never having something that you've always imagined you would have. So as Jerry says here, it's a loss that doesn't easily find validation, and every loss needs to be validated to be grieved. And what we often find for people who are wanting to share this in a workplace and wanting to say to their employer, I need some support, is that they don't see that permission to speak about it. There's no recognition within a policy. There's no recognition within conversations that are being had within that organisation. And so the emotional impact can be huge. And Claire's going to talk a little bit more about this now.
Thanks, Becky. So, I mean, listening to both Becky and myself and the associated challenges that come with going through any sort of fertility treatment or path to parenthood, you can understand that there's a clear link to mental health. And I said at the beginning that I took time off work. It was about 6 weeks off work because of stress of going through this. And actually, I spent a lot of time in work crying. I spent a lot of time in work just being very angry at people announcing their own pregnancies. This isn't a reflection on them. This is all about how I was feeling at the time and what I couldn't have. And my husband equally, he's worked for the same employer for 33 years and he's never off sick, and he took time off work as well because he couldn't cope with seeing me so upset, and he just felt really helpless because, as we've described, you know, it's the woman that goes through the treatment. So we did a lot of research on mental health, and we anecdotally hear all the time via our social media platforms of people who talk to us and message us and say, we can't cope, it's just soul destroying, it's affected my relationship, it's affected my friendships, it's affected my work relationships, it's affected how well I do at work, where my energy is lying. And a lot of people, as the stats show on the screen, so 90% of people, which is an absolutely overwhelming amount of people struggling with fertility problems, reported feeling depressed. 50% reported that they felt out of control, frustrated, helpless, sad, fearful and worried. I think those are very good things to describe how you feel when you're going through treatment. And actually, I think I need to make this really important point, that even when you get to a point and you succeed with your pregnancy, there's always that worry there that is going to be taken away from you. And equally, I myself, I now have a beautiful 4-year-old daughter, thankful very much to scientific intervention. We have embryos that are frozen, and actually I find myself having a lot of battles internally and conversations with my husband talking about what we're going to do with those, because those to me we went through hell and back to try and get those actual successful embryos, and they're just sat there waiting for a decision. And you know, there are very clear decisions: you destroy them, you donate them for research, you donate them to people. These are not decisions that, you know, what shall I have for tea? These are very important decisions that affect your life. So I just want to be really clear that there's not really an end to this journey. Going on to the next statistic on the screen, it is a bit depressing, but more worryingly, 42% said they had suicidal thoughts. Now, I personally know people whose marriages have split up or ended because of going through fertility treatment. And I was in a pub randomly in Pembrokeshire several years ago when my daughter was still a baby. And I got talking to this lady who commented on her, and I said, oh, she's an IVF baby, because I'm quite open about that now. Now I'm in this space, I need people to normalise these conversations. And she started telling me about her marriage breakdown 10 years previously because of her inability to have children. Her husband wanted children and he actually left her. So these are very real problems and very real mental challenges that people face. And as Becky's already said, there's the physical and financial impact too, because some people spend thousands. There was a guy on Twitter the other day who tweeted that he'd spent £80,000 on fertility treatment, because obviously you go through so many cycles in your area via the NHS. If you have that luxury, and then you have to pay for it yourself, there is no help, and people remortgage their homes, they put themselves under financial strain, and that's an additional pressure that then also affords pressure on a relationship. And the physical element of actually continually injecting yourself, having those hormones into your body, again, that's an entirely different story, that it just becomes really draining on you as well. So as a company, we commissioned a consultancy to do some research for us in 2020, so in the middle of COVID, at the beginning of COVID actually. And our key findings, if we've got next slide, thanks Becky. So only 1.7% of the people surveyed said there was a fertility policy that met their needs. So I need to be really clear here, we're not about just the words, we're about the actual deeds behind those words as well at Fertility Matters at Work. So I think both Becky and myself and Natalie found that we didn't have anywhere to go. We didn't have anything to refer to. There was nothing written down that actually said, if you are going through IVF treatment, this is what we can do to support you as a workplace. And actually what we find is often the fertility guidance or policy is embedded in something else, sometimes misplaced in a maternity policy, which people don't go to if they're trying to conceive. Maternity is all about, you know, congratulations, you're about to go off and have your baby. We've also seen it alluded to as cosmetic surgery or something elective, which is equally quite destroying when you're reading a policy that says, you know, we're putting it in the same vein as if you want a boob job, or if you want I don't know, something else that's cosmetic that you would have to potentially pay for. And then just over 70% had no fertility policy at all. And we do talk to a lot of people now who are actually starting to put these in place, but I think what's really important to recognise is that we're after a cultural shift in this, and it's not just about having stuff written down. So it's great to have that, and it's probably reassuring, and Becky's already said it, that this is all about people seeking permission to say that it's okay to have time off for this. And again, we're not these people that are riding on horses going, it must be paid time off. That there needs to be that flexibility with workplaces that actually say, right, okay, we recognise the need to do this. We recognise that actually you can't plan a scan or a blood test, or whether your follicles are ready enough for you to go in for egg collection. This is all about how your body reacts to treatment. So you can't time it. You can kind of give an indicative timeline as to when you need to attend, but that may change. I mean, with my own experience, my third cycle was in London. I had to travel from Manchester to London for a scan every couple of days. That's a 15-minute appointment, if that, and that was a 2-hour trip for me. So, you know, me nipping out the office for an hour or going at 6:30 in the morning really wasn't an option. Next slide, please, Becky. So again, you know, I've given my example of taking sick leave. So alarmingly, nearly 70% of people that were surveyed in our 2020 survey said they took sick leave during treatment, and that over 50% sought external support, such as counselling, CBT, any sort of intervention that would support them with their mental health, whether that was via companies' occupational health provision or EAP provision. We don't have those findings, but we do get told by people, again, anecdotally via our social media accounts, that people do go and seek treatment, and they have counselling. Often that is paid for by themselves, again, adding to the financial pressure that we described earlier as well. So we can see the impact on mental well-being is absolutely significant. And I think, was it just under 200 people we surveyed, Becky? I can't quite remember. Was it about 170? Yeah. So you know, this is just a little snapshot, but I guess what we're trying to say is, you know, this isn't siloed in these people. This is what we hear all the time from people that we talk to. So yeah, massive significant impact on people, not just while they're working, but in their own home lives as well. I think one thing I also need to mention at this point, sorry Becky, before we move on, is a lot of people get told to use annual leave for IVF appointments, and actually annual leave is a statutory right whereby we encourage people, especially in the last 2 years with everything that's been going on, we encourage that for downtime and to take time out from work. And if you're just adding this into the mix and just saying people need to then have this emotional roller coaster and pressure in their downtime, you're just kind of heading for people just having some sort of breakdown or emotional, you know, battle that they think, I can't do this anymore, and then they'll turn to taking sick leave if that's something that they can do. So I'm going to hand over to Becky to talk about the employment law element and how that interacts.
Just before we do, there is one other stat that I just want to mention that wasn't part of this survey, but we have an Instagram community of almost 4,000 people now. And back in 2020, I know obviously we were all hit by the lockdowns and it was all a whole new world. But later on in that year, we decided to run a poll within our community to find out how that had impacted people going through treatment. And a staggering number of 83% said that they had found going through fertility treatment whilst at work easier due to the pandemic. And anecdotally, that was because it had become easier to hide. And also it had become easier to attend appointments because they were working from home, easier to juggle their diary around because they weren't having to do the commute into the office. And that's such a powerful statistic to show how flexibility can help, but also how people are still having to hide this in this day and age in 2022. And don't feel able to be open with their employers about it. And we'll talk a little bit more about disclosure later. But just to touch on fertility and employment law, and I say just to touch on because there isn't much of it out there. There currently is no statutory right for time off for appointments related to fertility treatment. And that is something that we at Fertility Matters at Work are working towards. We can't say too much yet, but we had a really exciting meeting last week where we're hoping to start things in motion for some change in legislation around this. Now, there are some protections. So somebody who has had egg collection and has been absent will be protected against unfair treatment on the grounds of sex discrimination. That is a procedure that a woman has to undertake. And also from the date that an embryo is implanted, the person is classed as pregnant and so is protected by law. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission, I think it's worth mentioning that they recommend that employers treat time off for fertility treatment sympathetically and suggest putting policies and procedures in place to support their employees. And I think Claire put it so perfectly when she talked about annual leave. If I'd have had to use annual leave for all of my appointments, I wouldn't have had any annual leave left. And so it's thinking about how we can think more creatively around this. And it's not necessarily that all organisations will be able to afford full days paid leave for this, but having those policies and procedures and some idea around entitlements allow you to start those conversations and to start that process so that managers and employees are talking about this early to avoid the last minute absence of people going off sick, but to have some element of planned absence that will help support them through this. And so we've alluded to this quite a lot through this presentation, but why employees are so reluctant to disclose. And these are quotes taken from our Instagram community and things that we hear so often. And people are worried that people will think that their manager will think that they're not committed to their job anymore because they want to start a family, that they might miss out on the promotion they've been working towards. There's a lot of shame and embarrassment still around this topic. It's something that's so personal, which is what I said at the beginning. Some people are really scared to say something and then have to face the emotional questions that often come out as part of this. The lack of legal protection, people just don't feel safe in their roles. And we've had people talk about being worried that any absence will be used against them in redundancy selection criteria because of going through this process. Lots feel misunderstood in a male-dominated environment in particular. And also it's that stigma of putting anything in your life ahead of your job. And we hear the phrase career suicide so often, that if I talk about this, it will be career suicide because I'm showing that I may be taking time out from my employment at some point in the future and that I'm focusing on having a family. And it's trying to, it's the same with these family-friendly policies and procedures. It's trying to show that we're encouraging people to bring their whole self to work and that they can have both, and we will support them through it. And this is a life event that many people go through, and to go through this life event and not share it with the people who you're with day in, day out in the workplace can be a huge extra burden and stress on people in what is already, as you've seen through the statistics, a very stressful process itself. And I think just to end on this, we do hear lots of positive stories as well, and we don't want to just shout out about the things that are going wrong, but quite often with the positive stories, they often start with, I was lucky that my manager had been through this, or I was lucky that my manager was empathetic. And what really stands out for us is the phrase, I was lucky that. And what we really want to try and encourage is that this shouldn't be something that's down to the look of the drawer as to what line manager you get. This should be part of a culture of an organisation where there's things in place to allow people that permission to speak. The managers are trained and educated on how to have these conversations. And it's something that's normalised within the workplace, that is something that people go through every single day of the week. And that's what we're hoping to do through Fertility Matters at Work. So I'm just going to hand back over to Claire.
Thank you. I think one of the most important things around this is, this title of this slide says, what does this have to do with the workplace? So fertility is declining anyway, so biologically fertility is on the decline for whatever reason. People are usually leaving it later in life, like myself, to start a family for a manner of reasons. Career may be one of them. So when we say what does this have to do with the workplace, this is about people's lives. And I know there's a very different view from some organisations, say, people's personal lives have got nothing to do with us. But when we look at the gender pay gap, and we look at women in business, and we look at the family-friendly policies that the government are focusing on. So I think neonatal leave comes out in April next year. So the government are actually understanding that to have women, especially in the workplace, and this isn't just a women's problem, but the majority of people it will affect are female. Then we need to sit up and take notice and actually start thinking how we can attract those people, how we can engage those people, and more importantly, how we can retain them in business and actually help their career and get them up the career ladder onto boards, and empower them to actually feel safe in the workplace. So 1 in 7 people that you recruit will be affected by infertility. The 1 in 7 people you meet either virtually or face-to-face, like today. So I think there's 19 participants in total, so there'll be a couple of people on the call that this will affect, whether it's affecting you now or in the future. And 1 in 7 people you promote will be affected. So that just details the employee life cycle and the fact that this isn't going to go away, and there will always be people, but we're in the space at the minute, and unfortunately, where people don't stand up and say, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I need help with in the main. I mean, like Becky said, I don't want to be all doom and gloom either. We do have a lot of really fantastic organisations that are starting to go, do you know what, I need to do something about this, and I need to make a difference to my workforce. And they're actually starting to recognise that this is a reality for a lot of people, and they're being that flexible work employer, and they are actually affording flexibility. They're supporting, they're saying, what can we do to make this work for you, which is absolutely fantastic. So we do need to celebrate those as a success as well. So this isn't all doom and gloom, but in the main, we are getting a lot of people that just come to us and say, I don't tell my employer, I haven't told my employer, or I've never told them and I've left, or I've set up my own business, or I've moved companies.
Yeah. Claire, I forgot to mention this earlier when I was introducing my own story. I think one of the really striking statistics we found as well was that 36% of people actually consider leaving employment when they're going through this. And I was one of them. And I, at one point, I think it was after IVF cycle number 4, I just could not take it anymore. And I remember saying, can I have a career break? Because I just didn't know what else to do. And I felt guilty for letting people down at work. I just felt like I couldn't be who I wanted to be in the workplace. And thankfully, I was supported in taking a sideways move and reducing my hours to 4 days a week. And that kept me in the workplace. But if we think about retention and retaining this talent whilst these people are going through this life event, it's hugely important to the workplace to recognise this. And as you say, with the gender pay gap as well.
Thanks. So, the Fertility Matters at Work was born out of the fact that, you know, we want this conversation to happen. We want people to recognise that their workforce are going through this stuff, and this isn't suddenly going to stop. Like menopause, this isn't suddenly going to stop. This is part of people's lives, and it's part of evolution. This is what's going to happen in the future. So we are aiming to get people to be fertility friendly and a fertility friendly employer. So you've seen all the badges that people can get for different things. So we have disability confident, we have you know, all sorts of things in those veins that people can say, this is what my company has signed up for. So this is part of our kind of mission, if you like. I want to call it a mission because I think it is, along with everything else that we want to do. So policy and guidance is a good starting point, like I've already described, but the flexibility and the culture and the awareness raising is absolutely vital to the success of this, supporting people in organisations. It's no good having a policy that says we will help you and we will support you, and actually in reality the management structure doesn't do that. Culturally from the top, people aren't invested in it, actually, if you like, to be able to help. I have on my bio on LinkedIn and on Twitter the Emmeline Pankhurst statue, which is outside St. Peter's Square, or in St. Peter's Square in Manchester, and on the back it says deeds not words. That is something that I know Becky, myself and Natalie feel very, very passionate about, that we don't just say this stuff and not make things happen. We want employers to stand up and go, I'm in and I want to make a difference, and I want this to translate to my employees, and actually they feel they're in a psychologically safe environment to be able to stand up and say, I'm struggling to conceive, I need some time out, I need you to be flexible. Also part of our Fertility Friendly Employer stamp is offering access to internal and external support networks. So we work alongside people who offer psychological support in this vein, because we're not qualified to do that. We work with a registered nurse who is absolutely amazing at kind of talking about the physical side and actually all the medical side of assisted reproductive treatment. But more importantly and lastly is supportive culture, fostering openness. And we do that via various routes that Becky's going to expand on in just a second.
Thank you, Claire. So yeah, how can we support your organisation to become what we call a fertility friendly employer? So firstly, we have our membership, and that is designed to support organisations to work through becoming accredited as a fertility friendly employer. And that's all of the things that Claire's just listed. So supporting with policy, looking at flexible working, maybe suggestions around reasonable adjustments, supporting you through educating your workforce, building those internal support networks, signposting to external support networks, and that whole culture change with raising awareness. And I'll talk a little bit more about the membership shortly. We also have a unique interactive e-learning package, which you can just see here. And that is for all people managers and HR to understand more about this as a process that people go through. And the reason we did an e-learning package was because it can reach so many different people. And it may be that you've got somebody, a line manager, who said this isn't relevant for me at the moment, but 6 months later down the line, they have somebody in their team going through this. It means they can go back, they can refresh themselves. And what we talk about in here is not just what is fertility treatment and who needs it, but we talk about what employers need to know and how managers can have constructive conversations around this. We're also in development to produce a global version. So this is very much UK based, but we're producing a global version as well, which is aimed at all employees. So in terms of raising that awareness across the whole population so that people can support others who are going through this. We also have a training package which can be bespoke and flexible to your needs. So we can run internal panel events. We're actually running one next week for a large retailer on International Women's Day, where we're going to help them launch their policy and start this conversation. And from these panel events we've done in the past, we often get people within the organisation to join us and share their story. And what we found, as Claire said, is that creates that domino effect. That opens up the doors to this conversation within an organisation. We can also create that into digital content, so podcast downloads, and we can run training sessions, lunch and learn sessions, and also within the membership, there is some downloadable content as well for you. We also will support with policy and guidance creation. So I'll talk in a minute about the workshops we offer within the membership, but also supporting setting up those internal peer-to-peer support networks. And also we have a number of trusted partners. So if you wanted to go a step further and offer preconception testing, for example, psychological support, we have partners who we work with in the fertility space who can offer that to you. And our membership. So upon joining our membership, you will receive this badge that you are committed to becoming a fertility friendly employer. And you will have access to our membership platform. And within that, we've created a resource library of lots of different information that you may need to know. And importantly, that's covering lots of different paths to parenthood. It's covering the LGBTQ experience, which is huge. And if you think about anyone in that community who needs to build a family, who wants to build a family, is there the support and inclusivity within your organisation to help them through that as well? So every month we hold a workshop. So we're looking at understanding fertility treatment this month. Next month we have a policy workshop where we'll be encouraging you to bring along your policy, or if you've not started, to give you some starting points to really start to build that policy and guidance to be that kind of base level of support which you can then grow from. There's also a community. So what we're looking to do is put these organisations who are making this commitment in contact with each other, so to share best practice and things that they're doing. We've spoken to a number of organisations who are all doing very different things, and one in particular have created an amazing internal platform for people to share their stories and to really bring this to life. And you'll also have direct knowledge to us and our expertise and our partners as well. In terms of the accreditation, you will work through this process. We imagine it will take around 12 months. We will work with you, and by the end of it, we will review that. Currently, all of this is being accredited by the CPD, just to mention as well, so it can count towards that. And it all works within our 4 pillars, and our 4 pillars are with ease. So it's education, audit, support, and empowerment as well. And that's everything we think will lead to that cultural change that we're looking for. So thank you to everyone who's listened to the presentation. I hope you found it useful. We're open to take any questions now. I see there's been a few that have come in, but I'll hand back over to Charlotte, who I think is going to pose those to us.
Thanks, Becky, and thank you, Claire. I think you've already answered Fran's question on genetic conditions.
Yes, I did. Just.
That's fine. Can you expand a little bit on that? Because I'm not really sure what that means. So would that be if somebody's going through other treatment or something like that?
Yes, so there is. I mean, I typed it up, I sent it in a private private response. Sorry, Charlotte. I'm sorry,
That's all right.
Fran. So, you know, we do find this as well. So people who are undergoing different treatments, such as cancer treatments, that's what I put in the response as well. That people often who have chemotherapy or radiotherapy are affected, and they will have to either freeze their eggs or sperm and then go down the assisted reproductive route. But equally, anyone with there are people with genetic conditions. I'm trying to actually think of one very quickly to my head. Am I, Becky?
I often hear from people within the donor conception community where they have a hereditary condition where they
Thank you, Fran.
have to use a donor, for example, to avoid them passing it on to their child. So I think what this really highlights is how broad this topic really is, and the multitude of reasons why people might need to go through fertility treatment. It's not just because of infertility, but it could be another reason, like a genetic condition. It could be, and as we've mentioned before, the LGBTQ community, there's also people who are going down the solo parenthood route as well. And I think it's just really important to recognise the number of people who may be affected by this in many different ways. And I think as the person who asked the question points out, it does create that whole additional layer of stress. And these decisions are not easy. These are huge life-altering decisions that people are making. And I think for workplaces to recognise the magnitude of this and just to say, look, we know that this is a life event that you're going through or you may be going through. We're here to support you and we can do this via XYZ. It can just remove that huge burden. I remember I was quite open with my employer once I found out that I needed to go down the treatment route, and that worked for me because I'm generally quite an open person anyway. But the level of stress I would have felt in having to not talk about why I was taking that phone call, or why I was having to just go and hide in the toilets when someone brought their new baby in, or it was having that kind of support around me that kept me in the workplace. I think it really did. And for many people, there is just so many layers of complexity and grief and decision making that comes along with this.
I think, Becky, when you talk about retention levels, that's so key, because if you do support your employees properly, then, you know, what better accolade for them to think, do you know what, I want to stay with this company, especially at the moment with, you know, like they called last year, didn't they, the big resignation. So people that are going through that this year that really want to find the right company for them. If people have got, you know, if organizations have these policies in place, or even not a policy, but just a general, you know, this is what we're all about. We're about supporting you through menopause or fertility or whatever it may be. Just that they're talking about it just makes everyone feel a lot more included and open, doesn't it?
Definitely. Yeah. And what we're finding at the moment is it's actually very prominent in the press. So I recently spoke on Women's Hour about this issue, and we're just getting so much interest from the media really about this situation. And what we're finding is that the organisations we're speaking to are almost quite pioneering in the fact that they are going ahead and they're leading the way in not only putting fertility benefits in place, which are great, and I think that's amazing, but for us it's about that day-to-day experience of the employee, and it's about that culture and the way that they work. And I think what we've seen over recent years is that real focus on well-being in the workplace and thinking about women in particular and menopause, and how can we, this is affecting so many people out there, and it's just broadening those different experiences that people have and saying, look, we recognize this, we're going to support this. And I think that makes an employer so much more attractive, especially for people in this generation. They're looking for organizations that are going to support them through different things in life. And it may be that they start to look at fertility friendly employers as much as they look for family friendly employers as well, because it is something that the majority of people go through at some point in life.
Absolutely. In terms of the timeline then, if you were an employer that was looking to put together a policy, how long would you kind of expect to support someone through this? Or is it completely open-ended and dependent on that individual? I know you're probably going to say that, Claire, but it is, which is difficult.
Yeah,
you want to be flexible, but yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I had 3 cycles. Becky had 5. Natalie had 1. You know, it depends. You know, I hate that because I work in HR as well. That's my kind of standard stock answer to a lot of stuff. It depends, but unfortunately, it does. I mean, you could agree. I know some companies say they'll support paid leave up to 3 cycles, and then what happens after that, we don't know. There are some companies that support 1 cycle, but then it's that understanding, isn't it, about how complicated. And actually, you can become ill. You can become ill through treatment, and actually, then are you sick? Are you sick because of treatment? You know, and that could actually hospitalize you. So then what do we, you know, and then we had a message of somebody recently on Instagram that said, you know, I've been hospitalized and I think my employer are losing pay. I think she used the words losing patience with me. You know, I guess it's like anything else, isn't it? It depends on tolerance levels of employers and actually what they consider is reasonable. I hate that word as well, but you know, that's quite often bounded around the workplace, and isn't it? But it's reasonable. I mean, I guess if you had someone who'd taken 2 years off and had 20 cycles is a very different conversation than someone who's done 3 cycles over 18 months. It depends on the job. It depends on so much stuff. Sorry, I'm not really answering this question, Charlotte.
No, it's fine. I mean, yeah, I completely get you. I thought you would say that. I suppose, I don't know in terms of employment law if there is anything actually written down, or whether that's probably going to be the next thing, hopefully, you know, with organisations like yourself really pushing for this in Parliament. Then if they can pass a bill or something that protects women and men as well that are going through it, then that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and it's not just about that paid leave. I think, as we said, it's just that right to attend appointments, just like you have the right to attend antenatal appointments, and that cannot be used against you. The right to attend appointments to build your family is what we really want to see in there. And it doesn't, I know we are realistic, we've worked in HR, we've worked in corporates, we've worked in business, that it may not be possible for that paid leave, but what can we do creatively around flexibility? And like for myself, I reduced my hours to 4 days a week, which really helped, and where I could, had appointments on the day off, and just that ability to maybe work a bit later in an evening. It may be, and I think, Claire, you spoke to someone who had previously been through pregnancy loss and had real anxiety around just going for scans. And for her, she tried to get her scans to be in the morning, because if her scan was in the afternoon, she knew she wouldn't be able to focus at work that morning because of the anxiety levels. And so it's a two-way street, and that's what we encourage through the e-learning as well. And we have a downloadable PDF for people who are going through this around, when you go to speak to your employer, be armed with all the information, and be prepared to educate them. They only know, I mean, you only know what you know, and it's a matter of coming with some solutions as well. So it may be, for one person, work is their distraction and they need to kind of throw themselves into it. For another person, it might be really difficult. So it might be thinking about, okay, how can we do this on a temporary basis? And I think it is about having that long-term view around, think about how much you invest in someone when you recruit them and you train them, and you to then have to replace that person when actually supporting them over a period of a couple of years through something that's very difficult for them could mean that you've got their loyalty and their engagement and everything else that comes with it, and can make just such a difference, not only to the individual but to the employer as well.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Well, thank you so much. I think we had one question. If anyone's got any other questions they want to pose, then now is the time. It's great to see you supporting each other as well on the chat. Some of you have been through it yourselves, and thank you so much for coming on today. And please spread the word as well about what we've talked about today. I think it's for everyone, to talk about it beyond this webinar. So absolutely. Thank you to Becky and Claire. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And if anyone does want to book a call in with us, just head to our website, because we can talk through your organisation and needs and what we can do. I forgot to mention that.
Perfect. That's great. Okay, well, thank you. Thanks, everybody. And yeah, we'll hopefully see you. We've got another event coming up in Cambridge, so that might not be for everybody if you're not in that area, but I have sent you all some details out about that. And we'll keep you on our list for other webinars that are coming up later this year. So thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks, Becky and Claire.